Hi there, this is Joan, and this is another episode of From Joan's Kitchen. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm not coming to you live today. I'm going to be making two different dishes that are desserts, and they take a little bit longer than I could really do with a live Facebook show. So I'm taping this and I'm going to edit it to send to you. The two dishes that we're going to be making today are flan, which is kind of Mexican egg custard, and then we're also going to be making panna cotta, which is another dessert. Supposedly it's Italian in origin, and that one does not need to be cooked per se. There is a little bit of heating of some ingredients involved. The flan is a baked custard, and we're going to start out by having a sugar sauce that goes in the bottom of the pan, and I'm going to get that going. I actually have a pan heating up over here, and I'm going to have a cup of sugar going into that pan to melt and caramelize, and that's actually going to make the sauce in the bottom of the flan. The flan is not difficult to make, but you have to be really careful because this sugar, when it melts, it's really hot. It's just like molten syrup, and you just want to make sure that you don't burn yourself. I had actually started heating up the pan, and it's kind of hard to see, but the sugar is already melting down in the hot part of the pan. So you let it kind of sit in there, and you'll see it starting to get kind of liquidy around the edges of the pan. And you just want to stir it very carefully, because if the stuff gets on you, it's really going to burn you badly. So that's what we want to avoid. We do this step first because what we're going to be doing is preparing the eggs and milk that's going to be the basis for the custard. But this goes into the pan first. So this is basically just a pure sugar caramel. And as the custard bakes, this kind of turns into a lovely little sauce that's going to end up going on top of the flan. So this actually goes pretty quickly. I don't know if you can see over there, but it's starting to kind of bunch up, and some of the sugar that's already melted is starting to get like a really lovely caramel color. It only takes a few minutes for this to all be totally liquid here. So I'm just going to keep on stirring this around. Flan, the way that I'm making it, this is one of the desserts that was a very favorite in our family. My mother would make this. It's kind of interesting. She used a cookbook that was originally published in 1944 by a lady named Elena Zelatea. She was a Mexican woman who was living in San Francisco, and she was blind, but regardless of being blind, she was a celebrated cook. And with the help of some friends in San Francisco, she compiled her recipes that everybody loved so well into a cookbook. So my mother had gotten my sisters and me copies of the cookbook, and I made the flan out of there several times, but it was never quite as rich tasting as the one that my mother made, and I couldn't figure out why. And one day when I was visiting my mom, I took a look at her cookbook, which is actually an earlier version of the cookbook than what I had, and it turned out that they had revised the recipe. The original recipe, which is what I'm making here, calls for 3 whole eggs and 5 egg yolks. The recipe that was in the updated cookbook that I had been using called just for 6 whole eggs. And the difference in having the 6 whole eggs versus the partial eggs and the egg yolks was just really amazing. It made all the difference. Having it with those extra egg yolks in there made the recipe so much richer tasting, and it just gives it a really lovely consistency. The original recipe also calls for the custard, the flan, to be baked at about 350 degrees for an hour. And I found that if I cook it at a lower temperature for a little bit longer, that the consistency comes out much smoother, which is how I prefer it. The original recipe, sometimes in the 350 degree oven, the mixture would start to boil before it was really set. So you would end up with having air bubbles in the custard, which I don't find particularly appealing. I like it much better when it's a much smoother dish. The flan, there's a lot of versions in a lot of different cultures. It's apparently a dish that started in Spain and Italy and in Portugal, and they all have different variations on it. It's basically a simple egg custard that's baked in a pan with this sugar caramel on the bottom of it that's going to make the coating for the sauce. You can see here, the sugar is almost all melted. There's still a few lumps in there. I actually turned the burner off because it was getting a little bit too hot. What you want to do is to have all of the sugar in here melted so that you end up with a clear caramel, like a deep caramel colored syrup. And the sugar is actually kind of burning, and the flavor of the burned sugar is really a nice complement to the egg custard when it's made. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back on again just for a minute to finish getting those last few crystals broken down And I have here the pan that I'm going to bake this in. So when the sugar is all melted, I'm going to be pouring this quickly in here, and I'm going to be using some heavy-duty oven mitts to make sure that I don't burn myself. Again, I want to stress this is not a difficult recipe to make, but this sugar, when it's melted, is very, very hot, and you have to be very, very cautious when you're transferring the burned sugar into the pan. If you don't have this kind of a pan, a souffle pan would work, or also a loaf pan like you would use to bake a loaf of bread. Those are all fine. Depending on what size pan you use, you may have a little bit of extra liquid left over, but that's okay. It'll still work in the different proportion. In some cases, this is made as an individual dessert. You can make them like in a custard cup. My family always made it in a big dish and put it out in a big tray, which is very dramatic, and you know, everybody shared the same dish. I've known other people who make this in very flat dishes, so it comes out like a very flat, thin, it almost looks like a layer of cake. But my mom always made it, like I said, in a loaf pan, so it came out a little bit thicker, and I've kind of like followed her tradition in doing something like that. Okay, this sugar is just about melted down now, so I'm going to take my big oven mitts here, and I'm going to transfer the sugar from here right into this pan. And you have to work quickly because you want to get it kind of swirled around while it still is hot. And again, for this step, you still want to have your oven mitts on because this is very, very hot. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pick this up, and you can see the melted sugar in there. It's definitely going to coat the bottom of the pan, but I want to have it go up the sides as much as possible. I'm just trying to turn it so you can see it, but you do have to work pretty quickly because it starts to set up pretty quickly. And that's about as much as I was able to spin around. So that's going to be that for now. The next step that we have is going to actually make the custard. We do this first because we want this to kind of get cooled down while we are making the custard. And you may start to hear some cracking sounds. It does start to make some cracking sounds as the sugar is cooling and drying. It doesn't hurt anything, it's not cracking your pan, but that is what's going on. So for the flan, I'm going to start out by putting a half a cup of sugar here in my bowl. And then I'm going to do it with the recipe where it makes it richer. So I'm going to use 8 eggs, 5 of the yolks, and then 3 whole eggs. And I'm going to save the egg whites in here. So I'm going to scoop out my egg yolks and put them here into the milk. Now, I use evaporated milk for this. This is what the recipe calls for. Evaporated milk is basically milk that's had half of the liquid taken out of it, you know, evaporation, which is kind of like a scientific or a weather term. You don't want to confuse it with condensed milk. Condensed milk is a totally different product. Condensed milk, the trade name that you're probably most familiar with is Eagle brand milk, and it's called sweetened condensed milk, and it has a very thick consistency, almost like a really, really thick syrup, and that has a lot more sugar in it. The evaporated milk doesn't have any sugar. It's simply milk that some of the water has been taken out of. It's a really good product to have in your pantry. It's shelf stable. It comes in a can. In a pinch, if you run out of half and half for milk for your coffee, you could use that in there. And it's a good thing to have on hand. It's also, you know, if you have company coming over and you don't want to make a cake, you always have the evaporated milk where you could make this flan for a dessert. So I have my 5 egg whites separated, and now I'm just going to crack my eggs right in there. And then I have my 2 cans of evaporated milk, which I'm going to mix in. And I will be right back. Hi there, I'm back. And so I have in my bowl here, I have the 2 cans of evaporated milk, and I have my eggs and my egg yolks and my sugar. And I'm going to mix this up using a hand blender. You can also mix this in a blender, or you can mix it with a mixer. So the point here is to get the sugar dissolved into this liquid. And blending it up really doesn't take very long. And at the last touch, I'm going to add a little vanilla into this, and then I'm going to strain the mixture into the pan that we have here with the sugar in it. find mixing it with a mixer actually gets it to be a smoother, with a blender, I mean, gets it to be a smoother consistency than mixing it with a mixer. And I like having a lot of flavoring in there, so I put a nice healthy dollop of vanilla in. Give it a quick stir here. And now I'm going to strain this right in here. So you can see I have my pan that we prepared already that has the burned sugar in the bottom. You don't need to grease the pan, but I'm just going to go ahead and pour this in, and this is going to strain out like any little bits of egg, you know, like the strings from the egg whites or something that didn't get perfectly mixed in. So I'm just straining that through a fine strainer. And I think also straining it like this helps to get some of the bubbles out that were mixed up in there just from the mixing part. I'm going to let that all get in there like that. And at this point I need to cover that up with some foil for baking. So I like to use heavy duty foil. Got a big sheet of that, and I'm going to just put that over the top like this. And you'll see that I have this pan sitting inside of another pan, and the reason for that, here's my other pan, the reason for that is that we bake this in a water bath. In Spanish, the name for the water bath is Baña Maria, which means Maria's bath, and the French term for it is a bain-marie. Some of the recipes might tell you that you need to have boiling water in it, but I've had several cooking teachers who have told me that you really don't need to. Just using hot tap water is fine, so I'm going to go get that right now. So I have my hot water from the tap. There's about an inch of water in there, and I'm going to set this down in there. And so basically with the weight of this pan, the water is coming up about 2 inches on the side of the pan, which is exactly what I want. And I'm going to transfer this whole thing into my oven, which I have preheated to 325 degrees. And that is going to bake for about 1 hour and 10 minutes. And then we are going to get started on putting together the next dessert. The second recipe that we are making today is something that's called panna cotta, or panna cotta in Italian. Panna means cream and cotta means cooked. So the cream itself, it's not a dessert that's really baked. There is a little bit of cooking that's involved, and it's really minimal. You are going to be using gelatin in this. Gelatin is what makes Jello gel. If you don't want to use gelatin, which is an animal product, there's a compound that's called agar-agar, which is derived from seaweed, which can perform the same function. And then there are also some panna cotta recipes which use egg whites to thicken the cream, but those do have to be baked. This one does not have to be baked. It's almost kind of like an unbaked cheesecake type dessert. It's very creamy, it's very rich, it's very delicious. It's very smooth and cooling, especially in the summertime. It's delicious plain, and a lot of times it's served with fruit or a fruit sauce. This one typically does not have the sugar or the caramel coating as we are doing with the flan that's in the oven already. So this one we're going to start out, this has cream in it and milk, and we're going to start out actually with, let me see, 1/2 cup of the cream, which is right here, and we're going to heat this up, and I'm actually going to be infusing a vanilla bean into this. So we're going to heat this up very gently. I'm going to turn my little thing on here. And I actually have a vanilla bean which is split. This is an older vanilla bean. It came in a jar like this. You can usually get these in your spice section. They're not cheap, but the flavor of a real vanilla bean is just can't be beat. And then when the vanilla bean has soaked in here for a little bit, I'm actually going to take it out and split it open with a knife and scrape the seeds in. So the little tiny vanilla seeds are going to float on the bottom of the panna cottas, and it's just a very visually appealing thing. So this is actually just a very simple thing. I'm just going to go ahead and put that in there, and I'm also going to put my sugar in there. I have 1/2 cup of sugar, and the idea is to get this going until the sugar melts. And when that happens, when it's heated up a little bit and the sugar is melted, I'm going to let this sit for a half an hour, and that's the way that the flavor of the vanilla bean is going to be infused into this. Even though that vanilla bean was a little bit dry, it's also going to soften by sitting in the warm liquid for a half an hour or so. Other flavors that you can put in here include things like lavender. I've made lavender panna cotta before, which is delicious. And when I've done lavender, I like the flavor of lavender and honey together, so you can use honey as the sweetener instead of sugar, which is a very, very nice flavor. Unfortunately, I could not find dried lavender right now. You know, with the virus still going around, there's some ingredients that are harder to find than others. But I had the vanilla beans in my pantry. This is heating up pretty quickly. The only thing that I want to do here is just to get this warmed up enough so that the sugar dissolves, and then I'm going to let it sit for a half an hour before we go on. I will come back right before the half an hour is gone, because what we need to do then is something that's called blooming the gelatin. The gelatin comes dried. It comes in a little box. It looks like this that you can get usually in the baking section of your supermarket, and we're going to be using 1 packet of it, and it's this powdery stuff. And I'm going to be pouring it over a little bit of milk, and you let the gelatin sit there for about 5 minutes, and it starts to absorb some of the milk and soften. But we need to make sure that the gelatin is all the way dissolved so that it will cause the panna cotta to firm up. So that is what we're going to be doing next. This over here, the cream and the sugar, when I'm stirring my spatula around, I really can't feel any more sugar particles, and it does feel like it's a little bit warm. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off and let that sit for a half an hour, at which point I will come back to you and we will go on with the rest of this recipe. Well, hello again. I have had my vanilla beans steeping in my mixture over here for about half an hour, so I'm going to show you how we scrape that out. But in the meantime, I have a quarter cup of milk here in this kind of shallow bowl, and I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle my gelatin on top of that to get it to soften. You want to have as wide of a surface as possible to sprinkle the gelatin on, so that more of it can be covered in a liquid. It's a little bit funny, so I've sprinkled this on the top. You don't want to just put it like in a small glass or a measuring cup. It's sitting basically on top of the milk, but it's going to kind of absorb some of the milk. It's going to take about 5 minutes to do that. In the meantime, I have fished out the vanilla bean, and I have a small sharp knife here, and I've got my vanilla bean on a cutting board, and I'm just going to make a slit down the middle of the vanilla bean, and I want to kind of like split it open, and then I'm going to take the dull end of my knife, and holding this open, I'm going to be scraping out the vanilla seeds that are inside of the vanilla bean. And it looks kind of almost like mud. It's on there, but I'm going to stick this on the end of my spatula here and kind of stir it around, and that is what is going to make the those little flecks that you see sometimes when you have something that was made with a fresh vanilla bean. One of the cool things about a vanilla bean is that even when you've used it like this, you know, it's been soaking in the milk and I've scraped all the seeds out of it, is that you can still use it. You can put the ends of the vanilla bean like in a cup of sugar or a pot of sugar, and you end up having vanilla sugar, which is just a very tasty variation of sugar. Once we have this done, and after the gelatin has been sitting on top of this milk mixture for about 5 minutes, we're actually going to mix the gelatin and the milk mixture back into here and heat it up gently. It's not supposed to go hotter than 130 degrees because the gelatin is actually very sensitive, and if we go hotter than that, it's going to actually kill the gelatin. Sorry to go off the screen there for a second. I've got a little fork here. I'm going to stir up the gelatin. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of like caked on top of the milk here, but I'm going to stir it up a little bit. We want to have it absorb as much of the liquid as possible. And we're going to heat it up just very gently so that it will soften up more. And after we heat it up to about 130 degrees, no more than that, then it's going to sit for a while again to absorb. And then we want to make sure before we mix this all together that there's no big lumps or particles of gelatin that are still in there. And actually, before we put the panna cotta into the custard cups that I'm going to be serving it in, we'll be straining it one more time, kind of similarly to how we did the flan. I did a little bit of research on panna cotta, and it's actually has not shown up in food histories until the 1960s. It's an Italian dessert, and they believe that it started in the Piemonte region, And the theory is that it's a spin on either English cream, which is creme anglaise, or perhaps like a French blancmange, which is a pudding with cream that was also made with cornstarch. So they think it was a variation of one of those. I've kind of stirred this up here. It looks kind of lumpy, but the gelatin is getting absorbed into there very slowly. And I'm just going to take a quick look at my recipe here. So it is telling me that when the gelatin is dissolved, that I should reheat the strained sugar and cream mixture, which is what I have on my burner there, to hot, but not above 130 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back on again. And I have a really handy device here. This is an instant read thermometer. These are electronic things, and I turn it on, the light comes on, and it's actually showing room temperature, but it truly is an instant read thermometer. It has a pointy end. This is something that is really helpful when you're cooking meats, especially on the grill, when you really have no idea how hot something might be. And you put it in, and it pretty much instantly tells you what the temperature is. That's why it's called instant read thermometer. This particular one is called a Thermopen. This is the second one that I've had. I think the first one probably lasted about 8 or 10 years, and if I remember correctly, they cost about $70, but it's really a good thing to have. So my mixture here is already at 122 degrees, and it's getting hotter by the minute, and it's already actually 130. So I'm going to stop that and take this pan off of the heat, because again, I don't want to go too hot and damage the gelatin that's in there. So that heated up really, really quickly. So what I'm going to do now is take my little bowl here that has a 1/4 cup of milk and the gelatin mixed in, and I'm going to just scoop that here into my cream and sugar and vanilla bean mixture, and that is going to have to sit for about an hour. I am going to stir it around a little bit with my spatula to encourage as much of the gelatin to melt into that as possible. And the idea at the end of this is to have a really smooth, creamy dessert, but we wanted to have some consistency, and that's where the gelatin comes in. My first cooking teacher, Peggy Ryan, who was the founder and the chef proprietor of Va Pensiero restaurant in Evanston, I took cooking classes with her for many years, and she affectionately referred to this dish as cream Jello. And in a way, that's kind of what it is, because you have cream in there, heavy cream, and you have gelatin in there, and Jello that we're used to getting at the store is simply gelatin with fruit flavoring and other flavorings. So this is cream Jello. I love that name for it, but it's perfectly descriptive. It's actually a little bit more descriptive than the panna cotta, because apart from heating up the cream to melt the sugar and then heating it up again to get the gelatin to soften a little bit more, there's no cooking involved. Once this gelatin has sat here and softened for an hour, we're going to mix it with the rest of the cream. We've already got our sugar and our vanilla flavoring in there, and we're going to be pouring it into these small ramekins. I have 6 of them here, and these are going to be going to the refrigerator to chill, and it's just like chilling Jello. They'll be ready in about 4 hours or so. One of the theories about both this recipe and the flan recipe that is still baking in the oven is that they became popular in restaurants during the 20th century because you could prepare great quantities of them in advance, and they were very easy to serve. You know, you have these puddings or custards or cream jellos made up in advance, and then when somebody orders them, all you have to do is unmold them and you're good to go. So I don't know if that's true, but it sounds like a pretty good theory to me. So at this point, I'm going to let this mixture rest for another hour to make sure that the gelatin is fully absorbed and bloomed, and I will come back to you in an hour when we are ready to go ahead and put these into the ramekins. By that time, I'm going to be pulling the flan out of the oven and taking a look at it, but I've done it many times and it should be fine. So basically, I'm going to pull it out, and then that's going to be refrigerated for several hours to cool down before we unmold it. Doing a quick hit here. I just wanted to show you that the flan has just come out of the oven. I baked it for about an hour and 10 minutes, and I'm going to take the foil off so you can see what it looks like. So it's basically like a baked egg custard. There are some bubbles on the top, but I think the inside should be okay. It should be nice and smooth because it really wasn't too hot of an oven. This is actually going to come out of the water bath, which you see right there, and it's going to go in the refrigerator to chill down, probably at least for about 4 hours. Ultimately, what I'm going to be doing is putting it in another pan with some warm water when I'm ready to serve it, and I'll just run a knife around the edge real quickly, just around this right here, and then I'm going to take another plate and hold it on top of it and basically invert it onto that, and then the sugar sauce that we had in there will come out on top of it. Of course, I'll show you that step later, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like coming out of the oven. With respect to our other dish, I also wanted to show you what this looks like. This is the gelatin slash cream slash sugar slash vanilla bean mixture. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see those little flecks there. Those are the flecks of the vanilla bean seeds that are inside of there. And when this is all mixed together, those are actually going to be settling in the bottom of the custard cups, or the ramekins, which I have set up all over here. I'm just waiting for a few more minutes for all that stuff to settle before I mix everything all together and get that chilling. And I'm back. So I have transferred into this bowl here my cream and my sugar and gelatin mixture. And it's a nice smooth mixture. I can see the little black flecks from the vanilla bean in here. So I'm going to go ahead and strain this into this measuring cup that I have here with a strainer in it. I chose to use pretty much all cream and milk in my version of the panna cotta. But this is where you can get creative. There's other liquids that you can use apart from cream if you would prefer to. You could actually flavor it. You could substitute coffee for part of the cream, or you could put in lemon juice or lime juice or any other flavoring that you like. So this is just an opportunity to be creative. I'm going to go ahead and strain this through here. And the straining is going to take out any chunks or parts of gelatin that didn't thoroughly dissolve. But I do want to get as much of the vanilla bean in there as possible. I'm looking in my bowl here, and there's a lot of little flecks of vanilla bean here, and there's also just a few little chunks of the gelatin that wasn't dissolved, which is pretty good that there's not that much of that. So I'm going to pull my strainer up here and just kind of scooch this through a little bit, and the mush that's left in here is the gelatin that wasn't totally dissolved, which is fine. There still is plenty of gelatin in there that's going to help this to set up. So at this point, I have my 6 little custard cups set up, and I'm going to go ahead and start filling this up in here. Similarly to the flan, there is no need to grease these custard cups. When this is set up, it's going to be like just unmolding a Jello mold. So I'm just going ahead and pouring this in there. Right now the vanilla beans are pretty well distributed through the liquid, but by the time this is set, they're pretty much going to settle to the bottom of the pan, which is actually going to be the top of the dessert when it's finished. And I'm seeing that I didn't do a great job portioning this, so I'm going to work to remedy that. I have 1 cup over here that I see has quite a bit more than the rest, so I'm going to go ahead and even that out. So there, I have my cups that are pretty well even. It's kind of hard to see, but right now there are a lot of vanilla bean flecks that are floating on the top. As this is chilling, it's going to set to the bottom. What I'm going to do next is to cover these with a little sheet of foil. I'm going to take it out to the refrigerator and refrigerate it, and these will be set up in about 4 hours. So I will come back to you for the unmolding of the panna cottas as well as the unmolding of the flan. It's time to show you the last step, which is going to be the unmolding of the flan and of the panna cottas. I have here a little tub that has some hot tap water, and here's my flan, which has been sitting in the refrigerator for several hours. I'm going to just go ahead and set that in the hot water. That is going to loosen the flan from the pan, and it's also going to kind of liquefy the sugar, the burnt sugar that we had in the bottom of the pan. And I'm going to take a knife and just run it around the edge of the custard in here. I also have a bowl here that I'm going to use to unmold this. This is a little bit bigger than the mold for the flan, and it has some depth to it because when the flan comes out of the pan, the sugar is going to create a lot of liquid that's going to be kind of the saucer. So this is actually ready. You can see it's kind of wiggling in the pan there. So I'm just going to dry off the bottom of this so that I don't get that water here in the flan. And then I'm going to take this, and we're just going to, in a quick move, kind of flip the whole thing over. And that was kind of a satisfying oomph. And there it is out of the pan. And you can see the sugar syrup that's kind of all around it. There's a lot more sugar here in the pan too, so we can kind of get the rest of that out of there if you want to. Most of it actually came out. Most of it is already liquefied during the cooking. If you like, this can also be flamed. You can take some kind of a spirit like brandy or rum and heat it up briefly and carefully over the stove, like in a big ladle. and you can flame it and pour it over this and serve it flaming. If you choose to do that, if you have any kids or anybody who doesn't drink at the table, just be cautioned that the alcohol doesn't completely burn off. But that's kind of an exotic way to present the dessert. And I am going to cut into it to see how it came out. It looks pretty smooth. And yeah, it's a lovely smooth dessert here with no bubbles in it. It has like a really nice rich consistency, and it's going to be absolutely delicious. It really doesn't have the eggy flavor. It's just more of a creamy, smooth mixture of the eggs along with the evaporated milk, and then all the vanilla that I put in there, plus the sugar syrup. So it's just a very, very nice combination. Now here we have our panna cottas that have also been sitting in the refrigerator for several hours, and as you can see, they are like little like little jellos. They're kind of wiggly in there, and I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to put this in the warm water just to kind of loosen it up, and I'm going to run my knife around the inside of the panna cotta. And this is not so dramatic because it's much smaller. And you don't have to do this. You can certainly serve these in the custard cups if you don't want to do the flipping on this. But this one's a little bit easier. We're just going to do this. And there we have it. There's our panna cotta. You can see the vanilla beans that have settled in the bottom of that. And this is also just a very rich dessert. You remember that my cooking teacher called this cream jello, and that's pretty much what it is, because we just used cream and milk and gelatin and a little sugar and the vanilla flavoring for it. So the gelatin just makes it like jello. It's just jello that's made out of cream and milk. So that is the From Joan's Kitchen for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you will try to make these. I will be posting a link for you to get the recipes if that's something that you would like to do. And I thank you for watching.